Tom, thanks for joining us, and on the podcast. I've been looking forward to talking to you. One of the things that struck me first was when we were arranging to do this, was you asked for some recording time in the afternoon because you were writing in the morning, and it's been such a long time since anybody's impressed upon me their writing schedule. Normally whenever I talk to a writer, it just doesn't come up. So many writers nowadays just seem to squeeze things in whenever they can. But I had this little, it was almost, and this is meant with the greatest warmth, it was almost like a little touch of nostalgia, like what we used to do 15 years ago or something, was have like, well, I write until lunch, then I go for a walk, and then I edit in the afternoon. And do you have is that the type of schedule you've sort of stuck to?
Well, I do it if I can, I do it if I can. And if you have got the chance to do it, then definitely. I mean, I did sort of 8 until 1 this morning. Just depends on the time. So like year before last, I probably only managed to do that a couple of months out of the year. But just at the minute, I'm editing a novel in the mornings and working on a screenplay in the afternoon and running around my children and doing everything else the rest of the time. So, it's there's nothing to replace it, really. I mean, that the consistency of doing day after day. I'll do it through the weekends as well, if I'm able to, which is, not last weekend, but the weekend before, say. Last year, I think I'd worked most weekends. It's, otherwise you get to the Monday and you're having to spend half the morning trying to catch up with where you were, So but it's about what works for you in the end, I mean, I've been doing this as much of the time as I can now for pushing 30 years. And so it's, you work out what works for you really and try to make it happen.
Trying to make it happen. Well, working on two things at the same time, I know like a lot of writers do that as well, working on one thing in the morning and one thing in the afternoon. That must make your lunch quite an intense period of shedding one skin and then adopting another. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, no, it is. Yeah. But I mean, the stuff in the afternoon is at research level really at the moment. So it's not like I wouldn't be able to sit down with another cast of characters. And I have tried that in the past. That's beyond me. I just have a meltdown. I did work out a thing at one time, and someone was talking about Hanan on your podcast the other day, Hanan Issa, and I had a conversation with her about that at one time, and we were discussing whether or not it was possible to, if you can go to sleep for 20 minutes and effectively restart the day, whether you can do a completely different project in the afternoon. Sort of. Not perfect.
Did you both feel the same way about that? Was it like?
Well, I think she was struggling with the idea, and I said, "Try having a nap," and she tried it, and I think it worked for her up to a point, but it's never quite a substitute, really. And you're gonna hit a wall before too long, And that's the other thing, because it's if you're involved, I've never written a novel that's taken me less than 4 or 5 years, and you've got to be in it for the long term. There's no, as much as there's like a part of yourself that's saying, just work. You've also you've got to become aware ultimately that this is a long-term thing, and you've got to pace yourself, and you've got to find a way to the end. It's no good burning out halfway through. A 90% finished novel is no use to anybody, is it? You've got to finish it. Yeah.
I've read enough of them in my time.
Oh, well,
you get 90% of the way through and go, "Oh, this is petering out now."
Yeah.
But do you working in? I mean, we'll talk more about working in screenwriting, but working in those two areas. I mean, people who have never written either might think that it's like riding the same horse with a different saddle or something. I'm sure I could come up with a better metaphor than that, given 4 or 5 years. Yeah. But I mean, they are, apart from you're putting words to the page and creating momentum and creating storylines and characters, they're very different beasts, aren't they?
Yeah, I mean, there's transferable skills, and then there's a hell of a lot to learn. I mean, Mr. Burton was 2015, 2014, 2015. I started work on that. And obviously picked it up, put it down, picked it up and put it down. But I mean, in the process of that, I was sort of working out how to do it. So there's some things like centrality of character, especially on lower budget film when you can't go and rest on car chases or anything. And I mean, that said, I don't think there's ever a story of any sort that isn't improved by having better characters. It doesn't even matter how good a kind of action film it is. Like John Wick is better than your average action film because the characters are so good, because the world is so
Yeah.
imaginatively realized, as well as the kind of choreography of the fight scenes and all the rest of it. But if you even got that to fall back on, then you're essentially looking at a kind of character piece. So the character thing is central to it. Pacing is central, but also I think the other thing that's really common to both things, but took me a while to learn with Mr. Burton was trusting your own instincts in it. If something feels interesting, engaging to you, unresolved, if it's nagging at you, pay attention to that, basically. And I think in the first case, when you're dealing with kind of basically a new form, I never even read a screenplay before I started work on that. I knew nothing about it, and it's so pared back. You almost poetry in a certain way. I mean, the amount of weight that words have to take, and that kind of thing. So it was, yeah. I mean, it is a different form, but I think as you find your way into it, so skills that you've learned in other places, you can start to bring to it and apply to it. And so yeah, as I say, I mean, I'm working on another one now, and I hope this will be a kind of a richer business altogether. How would I explain that? Something kind of closer to the sort of preoccupations that kind of dog me in my novels, if you know what I mean.
Yeah,
Something.
absolutely.
And yeah.
Well, I wondered. I wanted to ask you about the process of developing the story of Mr. Burton,
Yeah.
and I mean, again, another different beast. But when I was commissioned to write a play, I found that a lot of the energy I was getting from the writing was the fact that I didn't know the first thing about writing a play, other than the fact like you've seen a lot of movies, I'd seen a lot of plays. That was pretty much what I had to go on, and
Yeah.
I was learning a lot from the people who knew what they were doing, and there was a lot of energy and impetus in me from all of that learning. But at the same time, I always had this worry that I wasn't writing my thing, because I was so in need of other people's guidance, that was I just like the stenographer for I mean, I always wonder about writing for screen, where the pressures of the finances are so much more than anywhere else, I would imagine, and that you're constantly being told the idea, the concept of the viewer, of the perfect viewer, is constantly being introduced to you. Was that something that was happening, or?
There are kind of constraints which you kind of wouldn't believe. You would think that we would have got past. I mean, so we finally got Mr. Burton made after. There's a lot of things to pick up there. So, but just kind of to your last point, we finally got Mr. Burton made. We'd had Toby Jones attached for about 5 years. We'd had almost all of the money since, for most of that time. And, we reached a point at the end, or at the beginning of 2024, I suppose, when, as I understand it from Ed Talvan anyway, the financiers basically said, okay, you can have the money, but only if you can get either Imelda Staunton or Leslie Manville to play the Ma Smith character, And so that meant I disappeared for 2 weeks, rewrote the script, building up Ma Smith's role in the script.
Right.
which was all to the good, to be honest. It wasn't a compromise. It was all to the good. But I mean, that gives you, I suppose, a sort of a sense of how constrained you are by finances. I mean, that's literally two people. The chances of their availability, the chances of their wanting to take on the role, are minute. And as it happened, there was, Leslie Manville had, whatever, 3 weeks or something in the summer, and was able to come in and do it. And so we were away, but you can't help but feel it's a bit of a miracle, really. You can't help but feel the whole thing is a miracle.
And how many like great projects out there never get made because all of those pieces don't fall into place.
Yeah, exactly. And yet there is a sort of sense of, when something's working, and this is the case with novels, and it was the case with San Helen, a non-fiction book I wrote, and it was the case with Burton in the end as well. There is a sense of a sort of stars aligning in some way beyond yourself. When it happens, a sense that this is taking place around you, which is, you can never fake that. You can never forge that. And I know Josh, who I worked with on the script with it, who was a producer, he was saying at one point, the reason we've had to wait so long is we had to wait for Harry Lawty to turn up to play Richard, and that was another thing. That was another thing that gave that sense. And also the fact that, like, as I say, I mean, it was nowhere near Richard Burton's centenary at the time that we started doing it. And then suddenly the stars aligned and they happened to come together in that year, which gave it that kind of additional profile. And meant that it wound up getting a really good audience. And so, all of those things are out of your hands, really.
Yeah,
and all of those things make you feel as if you're just, in the midst of something which is carrying on around you and is a sort of, in many ways, just out of your hands. Funny thing is that novels feel like that as well, even when it's just characters on the page, or and as I say, it was the same with San Helen.
Wales Arts Review is back, and it's a podcast. Or rather, the new Wales Arts Review is being built before your very eyes around the central column of my conversations with some of the most interesting and vital cultural figures working today. But for us to survive and grow this time, we very much need your help. If you like what we're doing, like what we stand for, then like our posts, and most importantly, subscribe. The more subscribers to our Substack newsletter and YouTube channel, the better placed we will be to grow and pay writers to tackle the most pressing cultural subjects of the day. Via Substack, you can become a paid subscriber and gain access to exclusive content and an ever-growing Wales Arts Review archive. And by hitting the subscribe button on our YouTube channel, not only do you let the platform know you'd like to see more of our stuff, but you increase the chances of us drawing down revenue from ads. All that goes back into Wales Arts Review to help us grow and improve. We need your support. Press those buttons and then go and enjoy our stuff. It's all for you anyway. Do you feel that, I mean, I don't want to drift into a conversation about superstition or anything, but do you feel that, you said novels are that way to a certain extent as well. Do you feel that, you spend 4 or 5 years tied to your desk, rigorously working the story, working the characters, building it out of an initial idea, and then there's so much more that has to happen before the stars align and before it gets onto a shelf anywhere?
Yeah, I mean, from the publication point of view, I mean, the book I'm writing now is under contract, and the one before was under contract. So, I mean, I know it's going to see the light of day eventually, which is a bit of a weight off your mind, and also, provides a bit of money to help do it all and all of that sort of thing. But that thing of the stars aligning, I mean, as I said, I mean, I think yeah, I mean, you were talking about a superstition. It's impossible not to feel sometimes that any writer will tell you that it feels, that it feels as if it's coming from somewhere else when it's working. The way that ideas fall in relation to one another. I think what it is that writing is in some ways a kind of meditative condition. And, in the type of thinking that you're engaged in, you're operating not just in the kind of the top level of consciousness that you might deal in during your normal day-to-day interactions. You're accessing means of making connections which are, in some ways closer to what you might experience in meditation, or, what people talk about if they've been using psychedelic drugs, or, anything of that order. Um, you're delving into a kind of a larger mind, I think, in a certain way. And so, that's not to attribute it to some sort of anything supernatural, or whatever, but you're definitely having an experience of the world which is different to the experience that you would have the rest of the time. And I think that the result is a type of thinking. I like in San Helen, for example, like the conclusions that I wound up drawing out, I didn't know what they would be when I set out into writing it, but the connections that it made, and I mean it made, those were beyond anything that I would have been able to just come up with in a normal, rational conversation. It operates on a different level, can I say?
I mean, it feels a little bit simple to say that we write to find out what we think about, but that is sort of
Yeah, yeah,
the
yeah.
essence of what you're talking about, isn't it?
Why,
Really?
why would you do it otherwise? I don't know. I mean, I can think of an immediate good counter argument to that. I know plenty of people, and my brother would be one of them, who knows exactly what he's going to write in a book before he sets out to write it. And then, having nailed everything down, he writes it very, very, very quickly, and he does it very, very well. But it's completely different to the way that I approach it, which is more of a kind of novelist's approach, I suppose. It's the sort of fascination in that process, the thing that keeps drawing me back to it, really. That's that sense of discovery. Always that sense of discovery, not knowing what's going to happen next. And yet, if it feels a particular way, it's very, very intuitive, If it feels a particular way, then it's going to take you somewhere. You know that already, but you don't know where it's going to take you. It's
How
a
did
difficult
that
thing to
work?
explain, and oddly enough,
Yeah.
I've rarely explained it very often. So funny that we should explain this. It's not as if I've really got set answers for any of this stuff.
But it's interesting that you draw parallels between your nonfiction book and your novels in the way that I would have thought that you'd. I mean, well, maybe you did. Did you have a better idea of where you were heading? Obviously, you had the structure of the book for San Helen,
Yeah,
but
I
you
mean,
didn't know what the conversations were going to be, as you say.
to be honest, they weren't. They were a lot more similar than I thought that they would be. So, San Helen, as you know, was a Roman road which led between the south and north coast of Wales, essentially. And after I'd spent a couple of days walking it, I kind of, because the road runs across the hill by my house here on Mynydd Illyd. Illyd, St Illyd, a 6th century saint, was a bit of a it's been a bit of a source of fascination for me for a long time, really, since I moved here about 20 years ago. So, I mean, here's an example. I mean, as the road comes across Mynydd Illyd, there's a certain amount about St Illyd, and then, but there were other things to pick up. And then, once you go up just north of Dolgellau, like way up in Gwynedd, there's a Llanellyd church there, which is the only church in North Wales which is dedicated to Illyd, and it's right next to San Helen, which means that you've got this kind of opportunity to pick up these threads as they come along. And the way in which that fell out, just that felt completely out of my hands. And it was also the case that it needed this kind of point of conclusion. Well, I didn't know that I was going to go to trial for this Extinction Rebellion thing at the time. I didn't know that I would be in a position to deliver, a talk there. And I certainly didn't have any intention, once I did, of doing anything more with it than just, using it in my defense. And then as it kind of reached that stage of the book, and that and that trial took place and so forth, and then realize that could then, that I'd then be able to incorporate it. Well, I think the chances of the thing having actually gone to trial minimal. Most people I knew who were in those kind of situations, the trial got dropped or something or other
Hmm.
happened, and it never took place. So that's what I mean. In a certain way, it's like there's a sort of weightlessness about it. There was a sort of sense of these pieces falling into place as I was going along, and after a certain amount of that happening, you sort of think, well, this can't now fail because it wants to exist. That's the way that it feels. And whatever the kind of rational approach to it, I've done it long enough to know that you have to kind of embrace that feeling, and you have to embrace that kind of optimism is not a word I like very much, but basically that kind of optimism. You don't really know what you're hoping for, so you can't really talk about it in terms of hope, but you you can be optimistic that it is going somewhere because it just feels like it is, and all the pointers are showing you that. And that is then becomes a kind of virtuous cycle, because that kind of positivity then infuses your writing, infuses your work, infuses your approach to it, and you get more and more overexcited. I do. And then afterwards I crash. Like my entire it's a funny thing about writing novels. I mean, it maps, like, even if you're not of a kind of depressive disposition already, it more or less imposes that on you, because as a like book comes together, you get more and more excited. You're aiming for the finishing line, and then you're adrift and you kind of collapse. I haven't written anything yet which I haven't had a sort of massive crisis subsequently, and had to pick the pieces out, pull them back together, and then find myself writing another one and repeating the cycle. Hopeless, stupid way to go on. I mean, my daughter's 13. She's 13. She said, "Oh, I finished my first draft last week." She's been writing this novel set in Pen Pont, like in the Usk Valley in the 1820s. I told her not to do it. I said, "Don't do it. Go and do something else." And anyway, she's defying me. But I try and it's one of them weird things, people always sort of, sometimes you go and give talks at like schools or something like this, and they say, "Oh, be positive to the kids. Tell them how great writing
Oh,
is."
I know.
I just like, don't do it. Don't do it. I don't say that, but that's what's running in my head.
I
Do
know.
something.
It's the line from
Madness.
Marquez's autobiography, isn't it, where he says, "If you don't absolutely 100% have to do it, do something else with your
Yeah,
life."
do something else. Yeah, yeah, completely. It's madness. It's madness.
Yeah. No, I do always find when I was teaching at Cardiff Uni, and we'd have industry days, and they'd ask me to do do one of the talks in the after, and they'd always be like, "No, no, look, don't tell them the truth. Obviously, you've got to try and
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
be upbeat. Don't lie to them, but be upbeat. Tell them about that there
Yeah.
are opportunities out there, and you can find your way. And of course, it's also difficult if you're in a position of kind of finding your way through the writer's life. It's difficult to turn around to the next people and go, you don't want this. This
Yeah.
isn't. You don't want it because you do as well, don't you? I mean, there is a compulsion, but there's also
Yeah.
those highs of, like you say, seeing everything come together, that elation at that climactic point where everything seems to be working and the book seems to be
There's
working and
nothing.
meaning something.
Yeah, there's nothing like it. There's nothing like it. Nothing like it. I remember when I was so the first stuff I did stuff for the Rough Guides, and I used to write about African music, actually. And I st- I was living in London for a bit, and I'd got overexcited and decided that I was going to write a novel, and I wrote this deathly thing. I was very depressed at the time, and I produced this horrible manuscript, which was not worth anything to anybody. And then I got a tax rebate and got out of London and came back here and was living in a sort of shell on a hillside. But it was spring, and I went back and started looking at this novel, and suddenly bits started falling into place. Funnily enough, the bits that first started falling into place were these bits which were set in the Llantoni Valley, which was the first stuff that I'd ever written that was set in Wales. Um, and there was this moment, I remember it distinctly, this one morning when I was sitting there, and suddenly I had an idea, a shape of a sentence, and suddenly this condition came over me in which, as if I think about this reading certain writers like Alice Oswald, the poet, for example. It was as if like the words were enormous. It was like the weight of them, the size of them, the every nuance was completely apparent, and how these sentences should go together was completely apparent. And it felt as if all my life up to that point I'd been going along with a wall in front of me. And suddenly I'd come to a window and I could see this infinite distance out of the window. And the state of excitement, I cannot tell you. I mean, I was awake for 3 days, I think, to that. I was just beside myself with excitement. And and then after a while you realise that you've gotta somehow do what I managed to do with that paragraph over like 90,000 words. And you go, "Okay, okay," bring it down a
Yeah.
bit. But but I don't know, like, like any writer, I grumble about these things all the time, but I don't know what I could do without it really. It's everything, really. It's everything. Still is.
What do you think about that, your London experience and coming back? I mean, there's a real
Yeah.
there's a
Have you lived in
slightly
London?
obv
Did you I think did you mention living in
No,
London?
I lived in Brighton I've
Right,
lived all around, but never London.
yeah,
It was just
yeah,
London's always, even since I was about 18 and I'd go down and visit mates
yeah,
who were in uni down there, London
yeah,
always ended up being a place that I was quite excited to go to, and then 3 or
yeah,
4 days later I'd be chomping to get out. I
yeah,
don't know
yeah,
what it is about London. I find it, I don't know, maybe a bit overwhelming, a bit too much. I don't know. And now
yeah,
I live in the countryside, so I
yeah,
kind of found my feet in my mid to late 40s. I feel like I've found my spot, you know? So
yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, it was always, I had it in mind, the idea of being in London. I mean, it it was music in the first case. I really just wanted to go and be in with the music. And so I went to university, London University, and I didn't have I had this idea, I suppose, when it insofar as a bit later on, like in my early 20s, insofar as I had some kind of vague, vain notion of becoming a writer, which I don't think I would have presumed to even think or admit because it would have sounded too arrogant. Um, God knows why now. It seems like the most natural thing. But like at the time, but insofar as I had an idea, I thought, oh, like, I want to be like I want to be a fashionable urban writer, really. Didn't occur to me to, write about Wales or anything. And then, one of the things and the first real sign of it was that experience that I described before when I was working on my
Mhm.
first novel. I discovered that there was something about Wales, rural Wales, where I grew up basically, that animated me in a way that nothing else could. And I did continue I'd moved back to London for a very short period of time, well, as long as at least like 6 months or something. And then I
Mhm.
would shoot back until eventually I was living in just like the last place that I moved to was a place called the Kevin, which is up above the Allen Valley Reservoirs. I was there for a couple of years, and I think that was within walking distance of the most remote house in England or Wales. There's 7 gates on the
Mhm.
track. I mean, it was completely impractical, especially if there were any chance of having children. No electricity, anything like that. Tractor batteries. Um, but there was, for one thing, you could, I mean, there's some places that I managed to live in so cheap. I think I lived on 4 grand one year, like like early on.
It's good training for a
Yeah.
writer.
Yeah. I mean, forget it. Well, I really can't understand how there could be any new art created in London. Really, how can anybody do that? How can you learn your craft
Well, I remember talking to a friend of
connection.
mine who moved to Istanbul for work. He was a teacher, moved to Istanbul,
Yeah.
and after a couple of years, he was trying to write as well as teach in an English school there, and he had to move out of Istanbul. And I remember him saying to me, he came back to Wales for a couple of weeks. I remember him saying, well, if you look through history, like eventually all cities, urban areas, cities don't like artists. They don't like culture.
Mm.
They do everything they can to push them out to the fringes, which is where all of the great stuff gets done. And I hadn't
Mm.
really thought it. And we were sat in a bar in Cardiff, and he was saying, look, what's happening to Cardiff? It's
Mm.
exactly what is happening in Cardiff. It's
Mm.
becoming just too expensive for anybody who wants to create anything to live there. And I
Yeah.
think, I mean, I'm sure that the money thing was not entirely everything you were suggesting there. It's something else as well. Like how does anything get created in a place like London? I don't know.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, it was the money thing that I really had in mind, but to be honest, it was a bit like a kind of radio interference. I couldn't
Yeah, that's what I
really.
was thinking as well. The
Yeah,
noise, the din, the constant. How do you get some quiet to just get anything done?
yeah, exactly. But I mean, I think I mean, initially when I was back here, kind of full time, and before I didn't really know any writers or anything around. I knew anybody, but it's sort of as slowly as time's gone on, and I found out it's like. It is one of these things. I mean, a lot of people have found themselves in a similar sort of situation and have found, cheaper places to live. And it's like, it's one of the joys of like living near Brecon now because there's a really, really healthy scene around here, essentially. I mean, there's a kind of irony about it in a certain way, because I suppose in a way I thought, oh, well, if I go to London, then maybe I will find this scene and, feel like you're in the middle of something that's sort of happening. And, you know, we this I was down at this XR writers thing in London 3 years ago, I think, and there were 20 writers who were speaking at it, and I was doing a kind of summing up at the end. Of those 20 writers, 3 of them were from here,
Right.
just to here. And if you're of the view, as I am, that basically finding a way to relate to and respond to the all of the various issues around the kind of climate and nature crisis is the imperative of like our time, you know, creatively, then there are so many people who are really, really active doing that, who are very, very near to here. And it makes you think, actually by complete chance, you go away somewhere looking for your people, as it were. You go away and you realize how much you are of the place that you come from, you know?
Yeah.
That's something
Yeah.
that always happens, isn't it? But then to sort of find that actually there are these people and that there is this fascinating kind of conversation that is now taking place around here and has been for, you know, quite a few years, really. I'm not sure that I could think of a hope for a better set of people anywhere, like in the broader UK, really. Yeah. It's a
It's
blessing.
yeah, that is. I mean, to tap into that idea for a moment of going home, of
Yeah.
coming home and finding. I mean, it's difficult to sort of navigate all these cliches, isn't it? But coming home and finding your voice,
Mm.
finding what it is you want to. I think most writers, maybe most male writers anyway, start out in their teens and 20s with an idea, like you were saying, about writing this like urban experience, this
Mm.
urban novel about the.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know what your novel was about, but I'm sure I've got about two or three dirty old manuscripts from the
Yeah.
90s that had similar kind of existential uh, ideas in them. But like you say, the long game of writing one novel, but the art of the novel, the art of writing is the long game as well, isn't it? It's not just a novel takes a long time, but do you ever think of your writing career as in that person who you are rather than your job, but
Yeah.
your writing career as having an arc as having, um, you creating a body of work through your lifetime, or is it just one book and on to the next idea, whatever's right for the next one?
Sort of all of the above, really. I don't think that, you know, anybody who is as preoccupied with character arcs and things as I am
Yeah.
could not try and think of or find ways of applying that to yourself, you know. There's always some kind of, if something goes horribly wrong, and there've been various things that have gone horribly wrong for me over the years, you know, there's always some part of yourself which is thinking, "Ah, okay, so that's this part of the arc, which means it's gonna go well." You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Whereas of course,
Of
there's no
course, yeah.
no no earthly reason why it should correspond with that.
This is my penance.
Y
Oh,
yeah,
things are
yeah,
going to
yeah, yeah,
improve
yeah,
now.
something like that.
Yeah,
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 yeah.
exactly. Um, but to be honest, I kind of approach every I've approached every book for a while very much feeling this is the book. This is the one that says, that not says what I wanna say, but answers the need, like the wider need. And there's always a part of myself which kind of hopes for and dreads the kind of possibility that perhaps that's it and I won't have to do it anymore and I can just do something else. Um, God knows what. It's a rising balloon. I have no idea. I'm completely unemployable really, apart from, lucky enough to get into this screenplay thing recently and this and that. But I mean, I've slipped past the point at which I'm much used to for anything else now. But I think in a certain way you've got to do that because you've got to put so much time, so much effort into it. You have to put all of your weight onto it. I think if you've got half a foot on another project in the future, you're not going to put all of your weight on the thing that
Mm.
you're doing now, and it's not going to be as good as it needs to be. So perhaps that kind of idea is just necessary just to do it, just to get a book as good as it needs to be.
And in a broader sense, that idea of being otherwise unemployable is again sort of putting everything into it, isn't it? And like
Yeah,
Bowie used to say, like, his success was down to largely to the fact that he had no plan B. And
yeah, yeah,
and
yeah,
and you can take inspiration from somebody like Bowie who says things like that, but at the same time, it takes a lot to have no plan B, doesn't it? It takes
yeah.
a certain type of person. It takes a lot. You've got to be slightly screwy to have no plan
Yeah,
B.
and I mean, I've tried to get plan Bs together, but they've never really kind of come off. I mean, I think, my dad, until not long ago, ran a sawmill that way down the road, and I worked there for a few years. Um, William Faulkner said that he worked in a sawmill all day and then, like, wrote novels in the evening. I just don't believe him. Like, I come back in the evening, I'll just be asleep with my face down on the table by 9
Yeah.
o'clock in the evening, it's hopeless. But, yeah, I mean, I suppose one thing I've got better at in recent years, so I've made various things, like I did a thing which was for Cardiff Met and Bath Spa universities, which is made it like a documentary about the River Wye year before last, and a screenplay thing and teaching things and this, that, and the other. I mean, if you can try and spread it out a bit, then your chances of less of that kind of monoculture, you're not so likely to be
Mm.
attacked by a locust swarm and then, that's the end of it. Is that analogy follow? You follow that?
I like that. I'd like to know what is standing for the locust swarm, but yeah, yeah.
Yeah, pretty much all the usual sort of things that, um, a particularly high bill, I suppose.
Well, yeah. Yeah, it's difficult when you like going back to the idea of talking to the young students who want to be writers, and
Yeah,
you think like, well, it's difficult to explain as the decades go on the sense of dread that a windowed envelope can give you as it comes through, as it drops onto
yeah,
the
yeah.
through the letterbox. Just seeing a window, a little plastic window in an envelope, and I
Mm,
just think this
yeah.
is it. This is the one that's going to do me.
Yeah, exactly. There's a few of those. When I was at university, like the first month, so we'd got 7 of us in this house together, and it's like second year of university, and we had the electricity bill, and it was 7.5 grand, and we were like, we were looking at one another because none of us ever like lived in a house before. We'd no idea what bills were supposed to be. We were like, "Holy shit!" You know what I mean? And
Yeah, yeah.
anyway, there was this. Anyway, later on, it turned out the bloke had come in and read the gas meter by accident instead of the electricity. You know, and it had actually only been about like £12.50. You know. But yeah, those kind of moments. It's that kind of moment, that coming through the door, but that being real, you know, and then going, okay. But anyway, I mean, I suppose I feel in a certain way, you know, as time goes on, I get far from kind of comfortable or complacent about it, but there are more things in different areas going on now than there used to be. You know, go back like 20 years, you know, like my second novel, like A Claw Glass, came out, and that was it. That was all I had. I got nothing else at all, you know, and
Mm-hmm.
no kind of support network. I didn't know any other people to sort of, you know, other writers you might talk to, and they'd go, "Yeah, I know what that's like." So at least you've got that to share with. Do you know what I mean? It's just this
Yeah.
sense of precariousness, which is just, yeah, flattened me. I'd lose a day a week probably, just out of blind panic, you know, thinking,
how did you get through that? Just wrote another book. Just got on to the next project.
Yeah. Well, I suppose I was working at the sawmill, and I wrote. My son was born. First son. I've only got the one son. And I was working on a novel at that time, which was one called Constantine, and I'd been researching it for years and years, but I sat down and started writing it. And the prospect of his arrival had this kind of galvanizing effect on me. It's like, okay, I mean, either I get this together, or, you know, that's it. I'm screwed. I've got to give this up and go and think of something and train and be a kind of proper responsible adult, really. And it galvanized me, and I was incredibly fortunate. I was translated into lots of different languages and made enough money to be able to write another novel. You know, it kept us for quite a long time. Well, you know, there were some downsides about that, but I mean, you know, once in a blue moon, something like that happens to somebody, and so I got a PhD during that time that bought me, and things like that. And so, you know, that was one of those blessings. You know, just occasionally one comes along. That was a blessing. And so I mean, you know, crises kind of reappeared, but I mean, you know, that helped to kind of settle things down, at least for a bit. I don't know. I don't have an answer. I'll be in a crisis tomorrow, you know.
Yeah, it depends what day you're being asked the question on.
Yeah.
Did you feel? I mean, this is quite a personal question, but did you feel? And I ask it because I sort of go through this quite often. With my little boy's just turned 5, and you have these moments where, you know, you're thinking, this is, you know, being a writer is too hard. It's just, you know, it's too hard to get by. It's too hard to get it right. It's too hard to get, you know, get your break, etc., etc. You know all the different things you go through. And I look at my son sometimes and I think, is my responsibility to him to be the dad who kept going and got there, or is my responsibility to go and, you know, work in a sawmill? Or
well, that's a good question. I mean, yeah, but you've got many strings to your bow. I mean, you know, you don't have to, you know, it's not as if you, is it? I mean, yeah. I mean,
but they've all sort of, those strings have sort of come about through being given opportunities from trying to write.
Yeah.
Like if I was given the if I was, with all respect to all the wonderful people I work with and all the great fun stuff that I do, if somebody turned around and said, just lock yourself in a room for 2 or 3 years and write your next book, I'd have their hand off. You
Yeah.
know, what I sort of, and again, going back to the idea of talking to like young aspirant writers, you know, this idea, and my dad, who was a builder and carpenter, said to me when I was about 15, he said, if you want to get by in the world, somebody asks you to do something, say yes, and then figure out how you're going to do it.
Yeah.
So when the BBC came to me and said, would you like to present the review show as it was then and the art show now? I said, yes, absolutely. And I just turned up and we did a pilot, and I've never been on a course or never done anything.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
just kind of, and I just think, well, the radio presenters I've loved over the years, what do they sound like? I'll try and copy what they sound like.
Yeah.
And that,
Yeah.
that's you just kind of like rolling with it really. And,
Yeah.
so
But
yeah,
I mean, I
and
think it's a good way to do it because I mean, it's because you're being authentic, aren't you? You're just you're just being
yeah,
yourself. And I mean, that was the last place I saw you, wasn't it, in Cardiff in the BBC? So and you,
that's
yeah,
right. Yeah,
and
yeah,
and
yeah.
it wasn't just that you obviously knew what you were doing. You also were sort of able to put us at ease and that kind of thing. And that stuff is is gold, isn't it? Really, you
Yeah,
know,
well, again, I think that like a number of people say that when they come on the show, and I think that's a little bit to do with the fact that I don't feel like I should be there either. So it's
yeah,
quite easy for me
yeah, yeah,
to talk to guests as they come in because I'm a little bit, I'm probably a little bit more on your side than I am on the side of the BB
yeah,
in
yeah, yeah,
terms of I feel a lot of, I'm not saying you did, but a lot of people come in and they've got a play on, or they're doing this or an exhibition, and the big shiny building in Central Square, and they're a little bit
mm,
overwhelmed by it. And I feel still feel a bit like that every Wednesday when I go in to do it. So it's easy for me to. I love having guests come in the studio because I feel like I just want to sit with the guests and
yeah,
have a
yeah,
little chat. I don't want to be thinking about the BBC or the show, to be honest. I just want to chat to people about art. That's kind of what I'm interested in doing.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, yeah, I mean, it comes across the previous time the last time that I'd been in there was for a Radio 3 thing, which was great. It was good. It was a good conversation, but it felt a lot more formal. And at the end of the day, what you're talking about is what you're passionate about, isn't it? Really, I mean,
Mm.
you don't, you're not writing an essay. You're talking about the things that you do and the things that you love, and you're hopefully expressing that with with all of that passion. I mean, what's the point of doing it if you're not going to do it? And so. But yeah, but I mean, in a broader sense, yeah, I mean, all the kind of things that I do have all grown out of the fact that I'm, writing books or trying to write books the rest of the time. Everything now. And I mean, that's the case with Mr. Burton. I mean, it was like a producer guy who I knew a bit, said, something about the early life of Richard Burton. He also said, "You'll be amazed how quick and easy it is to write a screenplay compared to writing a novel." Lying bugger,
It's this old thing though, isn't it? There's a myth around it. Joe Esterhazy, remember Joe Esterhazy, the Hollywood
Yeah, yeah,
screenwriter?
yeah, like,
And he wrote
what's his
Basic
name?
Instinct in,
Yeah,
in
Basic
20
Instinct,
days or
yeah,
something.
yeah,
He wrote it in 20 days and got $10 million for it. And so
yeah,
you can understand why some people go around thinking it's easy.
yeah, and he got 200 million for Basic Instinct 2, I think, isn't he? He's working
Yeah,
on it.
that's right. Yeah.
Yeah, 200
Yeah.
million. Hmm. Yeah, but I mean, in this case, I think it was, it was just because this producer, he happened to have read my books, and he felt that that kind of atmosphere was right for it. And same thing is basically true for the one that I'm working on at the moment. And so it goes. And I suppose you've got to try and keep enough of a momentum and hope for enough opportunities and make sure you say yes
Mm.
enough times for these things to just keep you ticking along.
It's an interesting mix, though, isn't it? Of a mix of doing your thing, being your own, being authentic, doing your writing, your preoccupations, paying attention to that, working hard on that, and having enough faith in yourself to get that stuff out there. And then
Yeah,
a connection is made and somebody comes along and goes, you were being yourself. I'd like you to come and work on this Richard Burton movie.
yeah, yeah. I think it comes well. At least there was for me. There was a point at which I suppose I sort of just stopped caring, not about anything, but just about like I remember the first time that I did a couple of things at Hay Festival years ago, which are awful, tortured things. And I suppose in kind of retrospect that I was sort of trying to be a writer, trying to appear like a writer. And, there just came a time when it was just like, well, what's the point really? I mean, if I've forgotten what the question is, I'm not going to just sort of, you know what I mean, bat
Yeah,
around and
yeah, yeah.
try and make out like I remember what it was or something like that. Just shrug and just say, I don't remember what it was. It's relatable, if nothing else. Most people know that experience, don't they? I do remember your question though, in point of fact. I mean, about the kids and how you would want them to think of you. Um, as I say, I mean, I really hope that the kids don't go into writing, but I really hope that they do go into something that they love and that they do it with their whole heart. I really hope so. Because, I'm 50 now and, I don't feel like I've scarcely begun in terms of what I want to do, but it's, I suppose you're aware of the amount of time that goes into it and the sense of loss, I suppose, in a way, if I hadn't tried to do it. Just because the call for it was so strong, Yeah, it's a navigation between those positions, really. I mean, but I mean, in a certain way, I hope that that what they love doing is something more like electrical engineering or something.
Yeah, we were very, very fortunate after the flooding that happened here, and we had to leave the
Yeah,
house for a number of months, 5 months in the end. And
Christ.
some people who we barely knew offered to put us up. And they have a beautiful house outside of Monmouth that is like a converted chapel. So at the end of their driveway, really, they have the old warden's cottage, which they've renovated to be an Airbnb. So they let us, invited us to stay there, and we were there for months over Christmas and everything.
Mm,
So they got this this beautiful house, and then the closest neighbour is, up on the hill a short walk away, another beautiful house, and both houses, the men in both houses are engineers. And I remember
mm.
thinking of my little drowned cottage
Yeah,
back in Monmouth. I was like, yeah, I'd love to see my little boy turn into an engineer. That would be great.
yeah, well, exactly. I mean, you'd feel well, like A, if he loves it, then that's great. B, it's reliable, and C, he can come and sort your stuff out for you, can't he? I mean,
Exactly. Maybe I
what
can,
better?
and
Yeah,
I can live in his house when I'm old.
yeah. You must
What
remember
was
to push in that
what was
direction.
Yeah, exactly. What was what was the BAFTAs like? Go into the BAFTAs.
BAFTAs was madness. It was madness. It was. I honestly didn't, and I don't quite know even now what to make of it. There were two things. So there was a party on the Saturday night. To start with, I should say, I mean, like everybody knew that Hamlet was going to win the kind of outstanding British film thing. So
Sure.
there was no kind of, we weren't sort of sitting on the edge of our seats, sort of thinking, it was much more like the nomination is a recognition and that's great. And we weren't expecting it. And so we'll just go and have a good time really. And there was this party on the Saturday night, which was down in the National Gallery. Uh, and I mean, it was amazing. It was a DJ in the middle of it. They got the whole place booked out, and like everywhere you turned, there was somebody with a magnum of Taittinger champagne. Like eh, I turned to my partner Laura, and at one point, sort of jokingly, because my glass was empty, and I turned back round, and that someone had materialised out of nowhere, was filling up with champagne, um, and yeah, I mean, there's that kind of otherworldly thing because I've never. Wandering around the BBC is a bit of a different business, I expect. But I mean, I've never, I suppose, outside the green room at Hay Festival, I've never been anywhere where you've, in the company of certainly like film stars.
Mm.
And everywhere you look, there's somebody, everywhere you look. And but the actual ceremony itself was interminable. It was just interminable. It was. I mean, it must have been sat there for about 4 hours. I could hardly
Oh
feel my
dear.
hands by the end for all the clapping. Um, and you are, we're talking there about a fair bit and about the trials of survival, like in the arts and that kind of thing. And then you're ushered into this world past about 6 levels of security guards, where half the people have just flown in on private jets from LA for the day or the evening or whatever. The scale of it, the opulence of it, and also, yeah, I suppose that's the main thing that was hard to get your head around. This kind of sense that you step from one reality into a different reality. And
Mm.
then, of course, you get sent back out into the other reality. And back, I've got my black tie I'd hired from Brecon Bridal Boutique, so you're back out of that reality, back on the train, back up to Brecon, hand your suit back in at Brecon Bridal Boutique, and get back to work. So it was really disorientating, and honestly, it took me about 3 or 4 days to feel normal again, feel like I got my feet on the ground. It was a really strange experience. I couldn't say that I enjoyed it particularly, but I enjoyed the champagne. But I did, but it was definitely mind expanding.
Mm.
Definitely mind expanding. Yeah.
And I mean, different book events, or
Yeah.
it is a different. Well,
Um,
I was at the Nero. I was as a judge on the one of the prizes on the debut novel prize. So I was invited to the Nero prize, and that was. That was in Soho, and it was all very flashy, and
mm,
there were
mm,
celebrities there, and I was a bit sort of, you know, um, out of place, not out of place, out of time, I suppose. I just
yeah.
felt like all very strange, very strange. But again, like the movie world is a different planet, isn't it?
It's a different planet. And my experiences up to that point had been so limited. I mean, it was, of course, we got Toby Jones, we've got Leslie Manville in the film, and I was pretty stunned to meet Toby Jones, I'll be honest. I mean, he'd been my dream, I'd kind of hoped almost from the start. He was the only person I could think of who I thought might have been able to play Philip Burton and do him justice. Because of what he can do with his face.
Mm,
Because Philip Burton's kind of the heart of the film, I think. And the reason that he's the heart of the film is that, he's because of the tension that's in him. Because he's a gay man who cannot in any way show who he actually is, trying to find a way to survive, to navigate life in wartime Batalba, essentially. And it was that tension between the internal and the external. That was the thing, the kind of the sorrow of it, I found it heartbreaking, reading about him and reflecting on what it must have been like for him or anybody like that really at that time.
mm,
And but because then nothing could be said, you needed somebody whose face could say that, and I couldn't think of anybody but Toby Jones whose face would have been able to at least express that so well. But that was the limit of it. And then we were filming in, I mean, there's one scene in Mr. Burton when Richard and his father Dick come stumbling in through the door at in Pontrhydyfen event, a cottage in Pontrhydyfen event, and flick the light. I mean, it was literally all that was like a plywood door frame stuck up in the car park in Fernhill, and there was no house. There's no, you know what I mean? Like the door opened and you put it, and the whole thing was like that. We even got like sound stages or anything or sets. It was, yeah, that was part of the joy of it. It was that everybody knew they were doing it on a shoestring, and it was done with a lot of love. It was the atmosphere on the whole thing was wonderful, but starry it wasn't. stuff
Yeah.
it was or not. It was not.
It's interesting though, um, writing for, I mean, writing for screen, writing for performance, and having somebody in mind. That's a very different way. I presume that's a very different way to living with your characters in a novel. You know, I assume you don't go for the Dan Brown thing where you're kind of casting the movie version as you're writing the novel.
No, definitely not. No, definitely not. Yeah, it is, and that's something you have to learn. And I think it's not just that. I mean, you could say you wouldn't have to learn it. You could write the script just as the guy, and then the actor would take it up. But the fact is that, like, there is a collaborative process that takes place once you know who the actor is. I mean, like, to take Toby Jones, for example, I mean, in reality, Philip Burton was 38 at the time of the events, in the film, and Toby Jones was in his, early mid-50s. So you're dealing with a totally different story. It's not just, it's not just that you're dealing with the whole dynamic between people of those different ages would be completely different, if you see what I mean. The atmosphere between them would be completely different. And so, at the point at which you sort of know who's being cast, you have to start kind of changing the relationships. You have to start changing, their hopes, their expectations, everything, because you're dealing with a different person, essentially, irrespective of how, of whether it's based on reality or not. And the same goes for, the places you might be able to film. We had days when, because there's a short, shooting schedule, there were days which were supposed to be outside, and then the forecast is bad the night before, you got to rewrite the whole thing inside instead of outside. You know what I mean? You're having to be responsive all the time. And that process carries on right up to the last day's shooting, basically. But yeah, I mean, I found myself, like, in this one that I'm doing at the moment, there is a role in it which I hope that Toby Jones would take. I mean, he was saying at the when we last saw him at the BAFTAs thing that, if we were doing anything else, then he'd like to be involved, which would be, wonderful if he did. Maybe he was just being polite. But he's got a certain kind of humor about him, and there is something kind of animating about that. When you're thinking about the character, he brought a kind of humor to the role of Philip Burton, which wasn't really there in the earlier scripts.
It's fascinating how the knowing who's going to take the role and having that sort of organically fit into the writing process is really interesting.
Yeah. And actually, I mean, that whole collaborative thing is a joy, because I mean, all of the actors, we worked with, in that. I mean, like Stefan Rodri, for example. I mean, the amazing actors, and for somebody like me who's coming into it, fresh. Oh my God, there was so much. Every single bit of it was a learning curve like this. Just saying, oh, that's what you do, and oh Christ, look, you don't need that line at all, because what he's able to do with his face just does away with it. I know that that's the kind of cliche of it. I can say it all with my body or whatever, but that was, it is astonishing seeing how people do that. So, I'm really looking forward to kind of getting stuck into another one, really, and just seeing what it's like on the basis of that, learning experience, and having seen what it's like to push it right through to the end point. Yeah, because that's the same thing with a novel, really. At that point of, like, reaching the conclusion of it, when you can kind of look back on it, and then then you know what it feels like to have actually finished it, and not just be lost in the kind of micro detail of what it feels like to get to that end point, and what goes into doing that. With any luck, I'll do a better job, but we'll see. You always hope that.
Are you one of those writers with a novel who sort of, you have that moment where you put the last full stop and you send it off, and that's a great feeling of completion, or is there just, all the writers who say, well, you just kind of have to let them go at some point. You can't keep rewriting something until
Yeah, well, you do, I suppose.
forever.
I mean, I suppose it's a series of levels. You reach this level, you reach this level, you reach this level. You have a conversation with editor. She points out that these things are apparent or aren't apparent, and there's so many things that you don't know, like in terms of what somebody else might understand. You know, like I did an event. Actually, was in London. I haven't done very many events in London, but I did an event in London which was for the Claw Glass, which was there's the second novel I did, and the first one that was entirely set in Wales, in Radnorshire, and it was with a kind of the person I was speaking to was from London, and about halfway through the conversation, I'd been a bit mystified by some of the things that he'd been saying, and then I twigged about halfway through that he thought Radnorshire was a county that I'd made up, like Wessex or something, because he'd never heard of it. And that was a mind-blowing idea to me, because that's where I grew up. So, I just sort of hadn't even thought that nobody would know where Radnorshire was. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
And so, but that's like one tiny example. I mean, but there's so many things that you can't. There's such a kind of balance to strike um, in terms of what people can understand, and that is a kind of navigation that that's essentially the balance that I'm trying to strike in in this edit at the moment. It's not so much a
hmm
question of, it's a question of making things the right amount of apparent. And that takes forever. But it is, each time I go at this, I'm like, okay, this is better than it was. This is better than it was. I think that this is kind of probably the last go through, because there reaches a point at which you just start to screw it up. But I'm not at that
yeah,
point.
okay,
I'm not at that
yeah,
point yet. Yeah. And there will be something that I will think later on, oh, I should have done this or I should have done that. There's one or two things in San Helen I thought, oh, I should have done this or I should have done that. And there's two things in Adlands that it's a bit like that. But I think if you've only got one or two, then you can count that as
you
pretty good,
you're
really.
doing okay. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Your uh work on climate change, with climate change. I mean, I did my PhD on climate fiction.
Did you?
And
Nice.
I
Yeah.
did, yeah. And about 2 years in, I listened to this podcast with Kim Stanley Robinson. Do you know
Oh,
Kim
yeah, yeah.
Stanley Robinson?
Oh, yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
writes these great big, like, doorstop, like,
Yeah.
what if novels, doesn't he? He's very
Ministry of the
good, very good.
Future. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
he was interviewed on this podcast, and I think the interviewer said, what really counts as a climate change novel now? And he said, well, all novels are climate change novels because it's
Yeah.
the world we live in. So I wasn't going to ask you, is your new novel a climate change novel? Because two years into my PhD, I realized that there was not much point in me even trying to define the terms of my PhD, other than much past what Robinson had said in that interview.
Yeah. Yeah. I think what it is first off a question of just writing honestly. If you write honestly, then you have to kind of recognize the kind of situation that we're in. I mean, if you're in Cardiff, for example, there's a reality that, all respect to estate agents, I know some estate agents, they're nice people. I've got a lodger's an estate agent, he's a lovely bloke. But, you know, the way that estate agency works is that you can go and you can buy a house in Fairbourne,
Mm,
and it can cost you £300,000. And the fact that this house will almost certainly be taken by the sea within the
mhm,
next few decades is not a part of the reality that's being discussed. That's not the
mm,
reality that the conversation, the exchange is taking place in. It is incumbent, I think, on writers. In fact, I think if writers have a kind of social duty of any sort, it is to attempt to kind of see past what Russell Hoban, who's a writer I've had a big effect on me at a certain stage, used to call the limited reality consensus. And I think that kind of limited reality, you need it when you're going about your day-to-day life. You've only got so much bandwidth you can cope with. You're trying to do a million things at once. You're trying to survive. You're trying to feed your kids and all of the rest of it. And it's not, I don't mean it as a criticism of other people, but I think that that's one of the reasons why when people are writing, that's a kind of social function, really, to be seeing beyond that and to be seeing to the broader reality. And the fact is that, the climate crisis is underway now and it's accelerating, and, the impact that we're likely to face are immense and immeasurable. And not only that, it's a cultural crisis. It's a result of the way that we live at the moment. So, those thoughts, that kind of reality needs to be the context at the very least of what you're writing at the moment, I think. Because if you're not writing honesty, you're not writing, in that, in my view. In terms of what I'm writing at the moment, I mean, it's actually set in the 6th century. It's set or at least that's what it's inspired by. It's kind of sort of picks up from San Helen in a certain way. But in 536 AD, there was a volcanic eruption, massive volcanic eruption. In fact, there seem to have been 2 in different places, one after another, and exactly where those were is contested. People talk about somewhere in North America and El Salvador, or possibly one of them in Iceland. But in any case, the result was that there was this shroud in the upper atmosphere over the course of 2 or 3 years, and there were plummeting global temperatures, and it was chaos and pandemonium. And interestingly, in the Annales Cambriae, it was in 536. It says that there is death in, or 537, I should say, because this is like the succeeding year after this volcanic eruption. It says that there's death in Britain and in Ireland, and that Arthur was killed at the Battle of Camlan. So this is, and from around the world there is this, it's very fragmentary information that we have, but it all suggests this time of like absolute upheaval. And so it's set in that period of time. But it's ultimately like it's about in the model of like the early saint hagiographies. It's basically like an attempt to write one of those lives of the saints, of the early saints, in the form of a novel, with the kind of psychology and the emotion and all of that. And it's not an easy thing to undertake, but ultimately, like a lot of those things, it's kind of about a relationship with the natural world and as you might say, the sacred in the natural world, those kind of areas that San Helen was about. So, as you can probably tell, I haven't finished it yet, and I haven't got a short line of some. But it's a sort of fascinating period, and it's just a sort of the idea of this. You could look at the sun, and the sun was, like the moon, like a full moon. It was that kind of level of brightness. You could just look direct at the sun. And this kind of haunted world in the kind of ruins of the Roman Empire. And within that, this kind of birth of monasticism and Celtic Christianity. It's the sort of original point of Wales, really, I think, in a certain way. And not only that, it's the kind of Arthurian time. And one of the things that I've always looking for, or always I've spent years thinking about in terms of writing in Wales is what's the root stock? Where do you find the stock that you kind of grow your story out of? Where do you find something that really kind of, which you can be ambitious with, and which is kind of, has its roots in the culture, in the land, and have them genuinely there. It's something that I've thought about a lot, really. How do you set a story here in Wales and give it scale? How do you give it weight? How do you make it feel that this is the center of a fictional world, that this is the place, in the way that a writer, say, in New York can do like that without ever having to think about it. To do it here, you've got to think about it, and you've got to come up with a way of doing it. And that's been a preoccupation of mine for years. How do you do that? And this is
Yeah,
one
that's
attempt to do that. Yeah.
it's something that a lot of that some of those writers from and like Copa Poes, and they were sort of looking at now. You talk like that, writing like those big sort of medieval romances that he was writing, and
Mm,
there's something in that. He to use him as an example, came into Wales, fell in, as a famous writer, fell in love with Wales, learned Welsh,
mm,
all of those things of the grand tropes of the English interloper who falls in love with Wales, and
mm,
and
mm,
and and sort of started writing these great doorstop romances in the same way he'd done in England, really. And there is something in there about trying to, even if it's unconsciously trying to, tell that story of a central story of something. The way that New Yorkers and Londoners do that
yeah.
is
Yeah.
a great example of,
Without a breath. And I think I did write something about this in San Helen. Now I think about it, and I mean, it was, I was kind of struck that two of the best known writers kind of associated with Wales are sort of known really for writing stories set um in 19th century London, and 19th century London, there's a place of story. You
mm,
have your association straight away.
yeah,
Um, I remember teaching a kind of writing course for sixth formers, I think at Gwynavid years ago, like the high school down the road. And there was a boy there who was writing like a sort of, I think it was like a werewolf story or something, and he set it on Dartmoor. And I said, "Why? Why have you set it on Dartmoor? Like, we've got moors in every direction. Why have you set it here?" And he just laughed. And the funny thing is, I understood why he laughed. The reason he laughed is it's like what he was saying is, well, this is nothing. This is not. And I know why he did that. He did it instantly and he did it instinctively because he thought, that's ridiculous. It would be a joke to try and set it here. And that's from a kind of fiction writing point of view for much of Wales. I think that's the way that people can all too easily feel, that
mm,
such a total want of kind of cultural self-confidence that you would want to set it somewhere else. And that's one of the reasons why it's so hard to kind of make a story, and
mm,
have a story and have that kind of sense of true fictional centrality here, because people are carrying that. And I'm like, turn that on its head. That's a perfect thing to do. Who the hell wants to read another story set, about werewolves set on Dartmoor? You've got all of this opportunity.
yeah,
Write it here. And it brings me joy to kind of when so like, for example, um, uh, a room above a shop. Um, oh, his name's gone out of my head.
Shapland, Anthony
Yeah,
Shapland,
Chaplin.
yeah,
Yeah, Andy Chaplin. Well, we've got the same um, editor, and as she told me, I didn't want to speak out of turn about it at all, but I mean, it's a brilliant book. I love that book,
mm,
and
yeah,
it's really, really grounded in the place, you know, and it's sort of proper. It's Valley through and through. She said that he had kind of doubts when he was first writing about whether he should set it there or whether he should set it like in London or somewhere
hmm
else. And, you know, if I'm wrong about that, Anthony, and you hear this, then I apologize humbly and please don't publish like some kind of mea culpa. But that's what I understood it. But
I'll have him
the,
on the podcast and he
but the
can
fact
denounce
that
you.
he then just, but the fact that he then resolved to do it, to set it there and to set it so emphatically there, that is a blow for me.
Mm,
That is a blow for the arts of Wales. It's
yeah,
like every time somebody does that, it's like that makes it that bit more possible, you know?
yeah,
Just like, I don't know, like, I felt better able to write in kind of Radnorshire dialect in Adlands because I'd read Niall Griffiths when I was growing up. You know what I mean?
hmm
Like
yeah,
those things, each one of those things empowers and makes the culture. stronger and richer and fuller. And, you know, and then people will go, yeah, you know, you have kids saying, yeah, I will set the story
Well,
locally. And
I think
you know,
I think there is a shift happening, and I don't know why
I think
it's
so as well.
happened.
Yeah,
John Doyle's debut novel's just come out,
yeah,
which I've just
yeah.
been reading because I'm interviewing him for the BBC next week, and you know, it feels like Gwyn, you know, a London publisher has picked up Gwyn Thomas. You know,
Yeah,
that's what it feels like.
yeah.
You know, rather it doesn't. With all respect to Gwyn Thomas, it doesn't have that kind of parochial feel to
Mm,
it.
mm.
Very, very international. It feels very just sort of relevant. And then I've been reading, you know, Liam Higgin. I'm going to get his name wrong. Higginson or Higginbottom.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Higginson, I
yeah.
think. His debut novel set in North Wales,
Yeah.
of sort of folk horror. There seems to be, and Welsh fantasy is sort of, which
Mm,
is crossing my desk quite a lot, is, you know, with big, you know, Hodder Staunton and Pam Macmillan, and they're bringing out these big, bold Welsh books. But
mm.
whereas, you know, not that long ago, 15 years ago, you were hearing stories of editors saying to Welsh writers, "Well, I love this, but could you maybe make it less Welsh?"
Yeah,
You
yeah,
know,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
you hear
And
those
I've
stories
heard,
all the time.
people like, you know, I was working at University of South Wales. I heard like, you know, people who were tutors there, like advising people to tone those sort of things down for a kind of London
Mm.
publisher, that sort of thing. Um, you know, those kind of ideas, they're written deep, and yet, yeah, I mean, I was lucky enough to be to do a bit of mentoring for John Doyle on the kind of
Right.
the Literature Wales program, you know, and
Hmm.
yeah, I thought he was cracking from the start. Really, really good. I'm delighted that it's, you know, been picked up so well and it's doing so well.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know, yeah, I mean, you know, so Laura, my publisher, who's also, as I say, Anthony's editor, and Caroline Jones as well. I mean, and you know, there are a handful. There's others as well, like, you know, writers from Wales or whatever who are there at Grant Books, and it's quite interesting talking to them about it because they've got some kind of perspective on the whole thing. Like when you're
Yeah.
inside it, you know, it's difficult to see what the trends are because you can't see the overall picture. But you know, she speaks very positively about it, and that's reflected in the fact that they keep picking up books from Wales.
Mm.
She talks about a particular physicality that she reckons is a kind of common quality to all of the books that she's read, you know, from Wales. And although I couldn't really specify what it is that she means by that, I sort of can feel it. I think that there's a kind of common tone, a common property. And I think that, you know, if those things can be perceived more widely, if they start kind of taking off, that's only going to help everybody else, if you know what I mean. Um, and then, you know, Folding Rock as a mouthpiece as well. I mean, you know, I know that that's come with its costs, but but I think the impact, you know, outside of Wales, from what I understand, is very positive, and I really yeah, I do feel hopeful about that. I feel really hopeful about that. I feel hopeful that it's a kind of, yeah, again, it's a virtuous circle, and that it's that as that profile grows, so it's going to help everybody really. And I think not only that, it deserves to be helped because there's so much good stuff around.
Very true. And a perfect, positive,
Yeah.
optimistic note to finish on.
You are an open mic with an audience of one. You are unabandoned by crusting in the rain. You are a crowded train.